Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Entertainment Network. I am your host, Sarah. I am very happy to be with you on this Tuesday to bring you another author interview. I hope you're having a great week so far. As we get started, I want to remind you to please like, follow, subscribe to the show on whatever platform you are either watching or listening to it on. That really helps the algorithm. It gets the podcast out to more listeners such as yourselves. Also, if you would like to support the show in another way, you can go to gsmcpodcast.info. There you can leave a tip or a donation. Also, I've mentioned before that you can leave a question or a comment. If you leave a tip or a donation on gsmcpodcast.info, I would be very happy to engage with those questions at the beginning of the next episode. If you leave me any comments, I would be very happy to attempt to engage with a comment or answer a question to the best of my ability. Again, that link is gsmcpodcast.info. As I already said, I hope that you are having a great week so far. It's June. The first weekend in June is always Plains Day in my hometown. It's Plains, Montana, my hometown. So they did that this weekend. I always think about it. I haven't been in years. I'm trying to remember the last time I went to a Plains Day. I think it was 2010, so it has been a while since I have been there for that. But there's a parade and there's stuff that happens in the town throughout the day, so it can be fun. Thought about it. Obviously was on a different continent, so did not partake this year, but had a good weekend. Took a break from the walking. We have been doing a full 10K every morning. Yeah, every morning during the week. Took the weekend off, but 6.2 miles. Trying to make sure we do that every day, and it's been really fun. We've had two separate days, today and last week on Wednesday or Thursday, that we've had random dogs who have tried to come home with us. Really cute dogs both times. The first time it was a puppy. That's going to be a big dog though. He followed us all the way home. That was bad enough. But then today we had a dog. This one was full grown, but a little dog. He walked with us for 3 miles, I think, followed us all the way home. I worry about them because they're just out there running around living their best life, but I don't want them to get hit, and I don't know where they belong, and this one wasn't wearing a collar, so at least the other one we knew, the first puppy we knew, that their owner was down the hill, so we tried to return him twice, and he ran after us both times, but anyway, today's dog, I will just have to be concerned about. So anyway, he was a cute, sweet doggy. But the walks have been going well, and we've been enjoying it. And we've also been getting out into the pool. So that has been nice. Just trying to get out, enjoy the sunshine, get some exercise, etc. But hopefully whatever you did over the weekend was good and fulfilling, whether it was restful for mind, body, soul, all of the above, what have you. But let's go ahead and talk about today's book. So this week I am speaking to author Gina DeMillo Wagner about her book, Forces of Nature. It is a memoir. Let me give you the description of that book. Gina DeMillo Wagner's brother Alan had a rare genetic disorder that caused him to veer from loving to violent. When Alan died suddenly, Gina was pulled away from the safety of her adult life and thrust back into a family she had been estranged from for nearly 10 years. Forces of Nature follows this rewinding of the past, Gina's caregiving journey and reckoning with complicated grief, plus Alan's Christmas-themed funeral and an investigation into his cause of death. It's a personal story that asks universal questions. How much of ourselves should we sacrifice to those we love? And what forces shape our sense of family and home? So again, that is the description of Forces of Nature. It is a memoir, and there are a lot of things that get explored within this memoir. Concepts of grief, concepts of family, chosen family, families of origin, our places within those families of origin, how our places within those families of origin can affect our lives going forward, generational cycles, all of those things get explored here. Alan had Prader-Willi syndrome, something that I had heard of, but when I started reading the book, then I actually went and looked it up because I was curious. I didn't know that much, so I did a little bit of reading on that so I could understand a bit more what was being described in terms of Alan in the book. And just like I said, a lot of different layers in this book and exploring of those complicated family relationships and how grief can change or enhance those relationships, etc. So let's go ahead and turn to the interview. Again, the book is called Forces of Nature. The author is Gina DeMillo Wagner. Hi, Gina. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. I'm excited to talk about your memoir, Forces of Nature. Before we get to the memoir itself, though, if you wouldn't mind just taking a moment or two to share a little bit about yourself so my listeners can get to know you.
Yeah, I live near Boulder, Colorado, and I've been a professional writer for about 20 plus years, writing mostly about the outdoors and travel and different topics and some personal essays. And this is my first book. Um, but I love living, I write a lot about nature. I love living in a place where I've got easy access to nature. Um, and yeah, I've got kids and a partner, and life is good.
Good. Yeah, and you mentioned nature quite a bit in the book, so it makes sense that that would play a role. I have to ask you one random question as we get started, and that is the little person photo to, I don't know if it's your left or right, because, yeah.
This one,
Yes.
this is actually a portrait of me and my partner, and it was created by an author and illustrator that is a good friend of ours. His name's Jonathan Fensky, if anyone wants to check out his work. But that was a gift. We've been friends for like 30 years, and that was a gift that he created for us. So that's supposed to be me and my partner.
Well, I love it. You and I are roughly the same age, at least according to what you say in the book. And so little people looked different in our childhood than they do now.
Yes.
So it caught my eye.
Yeah.
But we're not here to talk about your artwork. The memoir is called Forces of Nature, subtitle A Memoir of Family, Loss, and Finding Home. Can you give an overview of the story?
Yeah, my older brother, Alan, had a rare genetic disorder that caused violent mood swings. So he could be really, really loving and gentle one minute and really terrifying the next. And when he died really suddenly at age 43, I was left with a bunch of questions. Um, the biggest question was what happened, which I think a lot of people can relate to. If you lose somebody you love very suddenly, you want to know what went wrong. But given his disability and especially his intellectual disability, I also wondered things like, did he know that I loved him? Could he feel that love? Did he understand that people could love him and also fear him at the same time? And some of those questions had answers and some didn't. The memoir is really me writing toward those questions and trying to untangle some of those puzzles. And in the end, what I realized is the question of what happened to Alan is really a question of what happened to me, what happened to us growing up as siblings, and what was it to grow up alongside somebody who had such a profound disability.
Right, because it really does affect all of the relationships in your family. How would your family have been different? Would the family of origin dynamics have looked different? There's a lot of complicated layers to that story. So what prompted you, obviously, when someone dies suddenly, you ask those questions, but what prompted you to sit down and start writing about those questions?
As I was going through everything, looked for stories that kind of mirrored or validated my experience, and I didn't see a lot out there. There's really not much written from the sibling perspective when it comes to disability or chronic medical conditions. Yet, currently right now in the US, there's 20% of families have at least one kid who has some sort of disability, visible or invisible. So, you can infer that there's millions of siblings out there who are having experiences that are not really being talked about. So the first thing I did, honestly, I wrote an essay for the New York Times about just kind of the complicated loss that I had experienced with my brother. And I heard back I was expecting to hear back from siblings. I was kind of thought I was writing something that would maybe speak to the sibling experience. And I was really surprised when I heard back from people who grew up in all sorts of complicated families where they felt like they had to kind of defer to someone else who needed more or had to kind of quiet their own needs because there was bigger needs happening in the family. Um, whether that was due to mental illness or addiction or chronic illness or terminal illness or just the family dynamics being that way. So I feel like I wrote it for those readers, but if I'm being honest, really what I did was I wrote the thing that I needed. I wrote the book that I wished that I had had um, back when I was going through everything.
Sure. And your family of origin, your role in the family of origin is maybe a little more complicated than it sometimes could be because you're the middle child, but you're the only girl. Were put into a role of you were parentified very early. Um, so that makes it even, I think, more complicated to try to sort through some of those family of origin dynamics. How was the writing of this kind of helpful for you in terms of some of those dynamics, or did it help you sort anything out, or were there any surprises?
It's interesting. I think that there's a little bit of a misconception around memoir that the act of writing the memoir is the thing that heals you, or it's the thing that kind of solves everything for you. And for me, at least, so much of the work happened off the page and before I ever started writing anything. I'm a huge advocate for therapy. I've been in therapy most of my adult life. So a lot of the figuring out my role and kind of untangling some of those things I was doing in other areas of my life. And then I was coming to the page to try to like document and make meaning and find those points of connection with the reader to create something kind of cohesive. And there's definitely like healing, I think, in that, in the making meaning of your story. But yeah, it was a much bigger process than just the book itself.
I just realized as this was playing through that you can't actually see the picture that I referenced at the very beginning of the interview. It was picture the toys, the little people toys on the side, and you can't actually see it. So I'm a little bummed about that, but we move on with things. So we're going to go ahead and take our first break of this episode. When we come back, Gina will be talking about the process of how you choose which stories you want to include in a memoir. So stay tuned. You are listening to and or watching the GSMC Book Review podcast, and I will be right back.
Mm-hmm. 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 Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to work, cause my boss is a jerk, and I'm not even that paid. I need a change in my life, cause I don't feel alive, and there's nothing that makes me happy. Hold my beer for a minute, I'm about to quit my job, cash in for a ticket. I'm going on a trip and I don't plan to visit. I'm gonna stay there till I feel like I'm winning, and this is just the beginning. I need a big change, help me feel like living. I need a big swing, home runs I'm hitting, and I'll never look back, moving on till I get it all. And we all got dreams, we all want things, but what you gonna do for it? How you gonna move for it? What you gonna be? And do you believe you can do anything?
Hi, Gina. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. I'm excited to talk about your memoir, Forces of Nature. Before we get to the memoir itself, though, if you wouldn't mind just taking a moment or two to share a little bit about yourself so my listeners can get to know you. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review podcast and my conversation with author Gina DeMillo Wagner. Before the break, she was talking about points of connection and meaning, and I know this isn't exactly what she was talking about, but for me, I think those points of connection that I feel with an author and with an author's story are exactly why I read memoir. I'm not sure if that's exactly translatable in terms of authors who write memoirs, finding points of connection with the reader. But for me, I really do appreciate those points of connection and meaning that I find within a memoir when I feel that connection with the author. So as we get back into this second segment, I do want to remind you once again that your support is amazing, and just listening to or watching this episode is supporting enough. But if you want to support the podcast and the entire network in a slightly different way, you can go to gsmcpodcast.info, leave a tip or a donation. Again, leave a question or a comment with that tip or donation. I'm happy to answer or engage with that comment or question. So gsmcpodcast.info, and thank you for all of the support that you give. It is very, very appreciated. Let's go ahead and return to the conversation with Gina. And when it came time to sit down and write the story, because it tends to go back and forth between 2016, which is when your brother died, and then growing up and your childhood. So what was your process for deciding what stories to include, how to do that dual timeline, etc.?
In terms of what stories to include, there's a couple layers to that. I think when you're writing memoir, especially, there's a process you go through where you kind of set some guardrails around, where does my story end and someone else's story begin? So I put a lot of care into kind of zeroing in on the aspects of my story that felt like mine to tell, in terms of my relationship with my brother, and trying to figure out maybe where I don't want to encroach on someone else's perspective or someone else's story. Although, of course, when you're writing memoir, it includes other people. So there was a process around that I think is a little bit more intuitive and self-reflective that you go through when you're writing something like this. And then in terms of, what to include, I didn't really outline or map the book explicitly. I mean, I had an idea of, okay, here's the present day arc and here's the childhood arc, and what experiences were kind of emblematic of those two time frames in my life. So I definitely was trying to pick and choose, okay, here's an example of a childhood experience that was really warm and endearing and kind of showcases Alan's personality, and then maybe here's something that kind of showcases some of the violence and the terror that we experienced. So yeah, there was definitely a process around picking and choosing what scenes to include that would kind of tell the story as a whole.
Sure.
Yeah, and then in terms of just the going back and forth, I didn't write those two timelines separately. It's not like I wrote the present day and then I wrote the past. It really felt very organic in terms of I was writing about what happened in the aftermath of his death, and every question felt like it had an answer in my childhood narrative. So it felt like there was this kind of callback that was naturally happening between those two timelines.
Mm-hmm. And, memoirs when you have complicated family relationships, I would imagine, can maybe feel a little trickier. Was that ever a concern in terms of writing things that could affect already complicated family relationships?
It was, in the sense that I wanted to be as truthful and honest and true to my experience as possible. Like I mentioned before, I've got this background in journalism, and so there was a lot of research and fact checking that I did going into it and throughout the process, just to kind of ensure that I was being as fair and honest and truthful as you can possibly be, with the understanding, of course, that with all memoir, it's one person's experience and their perspective. But it's interesting, because of the way I grew up and how much I have always had to defer to everyone else's experience and center their feelings and their experience, I was really focused this time on trying to really tune into my experience and not worry as much about the reactions that I would get from others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine it would be a process of, and trying to make sure that you're being true to yourself in that process. What do you hope that readers might take away from the book?
There's a lot of takeaway messages. I think the biggest thing is I want to give people permission, by naming the joys and the heartaches of growing up in such a complicated family. I want to give people permission to name their own complicated experiences around family and boundaries and, families of origin and families of choice, but also just around the relationships that we have and the people that we love and lose. I think one thing I realized going into this is that there's not a lot out there that really talks about what it's like, when you have a complicated relationship with somebody and then you lose that person. Your grief is complicated. Like, your relationship doesn't become any less complicated just because the person's not there anymore. So I hope that people kind of take away that it's okay for your grief over those losses to also feel messy and nonlinear. And it's okay for you to kind of take, the pieces that you inherit from those relationships and make meaning for yourself and kind of find what you need to have peace.
Mm-hmm. And, you mentioned that you have understandably been in therapy for a lot of your adult life. But was there anything that you personally took away from the writing of the memoir?
I felt really satisfied by just the publishing process and what a long process it is and how much endurance it requires. So I had some takeaways just like on a career level around like having produced a book and knowing that I'm capable of writing a book length work. But ultimately, as I moved through the publishing process, the closer and closer I got to publication day, I started to feel like the book was no longer mine. That it belonged to whoever's going to read it. And so there was this kind of process. I had this image in my mind of letting go, kind of wrapping the book up, swaddling it, maybe putting it on a raft and floating it down a river and just letting it go and trusting that it's going to reach the people that it's going to reach. But for me, it's been really kind of nice to feel like it's this thing that I created, but it's not mine. It belongs to whoever is going to read it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that kind of goes back to that question of what do you hope readers will take away from the book? Your hopes are your hopes, but there's so many factors of what's going on in a person's life as they're reading that are going to affect how they read it. So you really do have to let go of some of those expectations, don't you?
Yeah, and I actually really love that. I mean, it's as I'm starting, the book's been out for a couple weeks now. As I'm hearing back from people, everyone's reading it through their own filter and their own experiences, and they're taking away things that I didn't, necessarily imagine. So I think that's really the beautiful thing about any kind of literature, right? Is that you get to kind of metabolize it through your own experiences.
Mm-hmm. This is your first book length written work, but would you write another book? Maybe not a memoir, maybe something else, or even another memoir?
I would. I have been working on some essays around nature and nurturing. So some of the themes that are present in the memoir, but kind of dialed more a little bit into, what nature can teach us about ourselves. And I've published a few, but my hope is to keep going in that vein for a little while and then maybe pull together a collection and publish that.
Okay, makes sense. And then are there any other of your writings, essays, anything else that you would like to highlight during this time?
If people want to go check out the New York Times essay that I mentioned, that's still up on their website. It's called Mourning the Loss of a Sibling Rival. My website has a lot of my work on there if people are curious. That's GinaDeWagner.com. And then I publish a free Substack. So I put some behind the scenes things for the book. If people are wondering a little bit more of the backstory of some of the parts of the book, they could subscribe to the newsletter and get some of those in their inbox too.
Okay. And then you again, this is your first book, but not your first foray into writing. You've been doing that for a while. So was writing something that you wanted to do, or how did you come into writing and then writing for publication?
Yeah, it's something that I always did, I think, as a coping mechanism, as you know, from a very young age. I was journaling. Um, I like to joke since my first writing job was for magazines, writing a lot of service content and travel and how-to content. I like to reflect back on the fact that in fifth grade, I won an award for writing a how-to essay um, for my school about how to make a model rocket. And so I had forgotten about that, and I came across it, actually when I was writing this book, and I was like, oh, okay. I didn't realize that that would become part of my career in such a profound way. But yeah, I mean, I started out in college studying wildlife biology, thinking I wanted to be outdoors in nature and how can I find a job that would allow me to be outdoors, and writing was a hobby. I didn't really understand that you could make a living doing it. And it wasn't until I had some professors that kind of highlighted that there was a type of writing where you could, um, write about nature, write about the outdoors, write about science in a way. And so I ended up going back and getting my master's in journalism so that I could do that full time.
Yeah.
So it's been fun mostly.
That's good. From your experiences, what advice do you have for someone who is maybe considering writing a memoir?
I think having that kind of outside scaffolding and support that I mentioned before, not doing it alone, not expecting the writing itself to be the thing that heals you, but kind of putting in place the support, the validation. And it doesn't have to be therapy. I mean, it could be a really amazing writing group, but just kind of having that network that's going to support you through the process emotionally, logistically, kind of cheering you on. And then I think also just having patience with the process, having patience with yourself, having patience with the publishing world, which moves at a glacial pace.
Mhm.
But yeah, just don't try to go it alone.
Yeah. I have said it before, but it bears repeating. So often, the advice that we hear from the authors that I speak to can apply to so many more situations in life, not just writing. And I think what Gina was just saying about patience with the process and not going it alone when you don't have to are definitely bits of advice that I could apply to many, many situations in my own life. So I appreciate that from Gina. We are going to go ahead and take our second break of this episode. When we come back, we'll be talking about writing in terms of everything else that you have to find with balance, a family, a full-time job, etc., and how Gina balanced all of that. So you are tuned in to the GSMC Book Review podcast, and we will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review podcast and my conversation with author Gina DeMillo Wagner. We are talking about her memoir, Forces of Nature. Before the break, we were talking about, well, she was giving her advice for aspiring authors, and I was saying that it is good advice in a lot of different situations. So let's go ahead and return now to that conversation with Gina. And how did you find balance and time? Because you mentioned you have two children, you've got a spouse, you've got a full-time job, and then you decide to write a memoir. How did you figure that schedule out for yourself?
Yeah, when I was drafting the the first draft of this, I actually was working full time in a corporate setting, really long, intense hours. And so I got really good at stealing any little 15-minute chunk of time that I could find. I think a lot of times with writing, you wait until you have time or you feel like you have to have this great expanse on your schedule to be able to sit down and write a book. But in reality, it can be done in little chunks with discipline over time. So I had like a legal pad next to my desk at my office where if something came to me, I would write it down. I was writing on my lunch breaks. I was taking walks around the office building with my phone and the notes app and just doing like a voice to text, like recording things that way. I was waking up early. I was just basically trying to steal like every little bit that I could. And then toward the end, I ended up using vacation days and checking into a cabin where there was no television and no Wi-Fi so that I could really just kind of put my head down and get those bigger chunks written.
Yeah. It sounds like you had bits and pieces in a lot of different places from the legal pad and notes. And I'm glad that you found them all, or if you didn't, that
Yes.
they came to you.
It all funneled into a manuscript.
Yes, yes. When you take time to read just for you, when you have a little time, which we don't always have, but when you do, what are your favorite authors and genres?
I love reading other memoir. I'm reluctant to choose favorites, but there's a few things that I can tell you I've read recently that I loved. I read Miranda July's new novel, All Fours, that just came out. We have the same book birthday, actually.
Hmm.
I just finished that a couple days ago, and I'm still processing it. It's just one of those wild and kind of transformative novels that kind of makes you question everything in your life. So I would recommend that one, especially for anybody, women, especially kind of in the middle of their life. Um, I recently read In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. That's a memoir. It's kind of an unconventional structure for a memoir. It's kind of snapshots and vignettes and a little bit of cultural commentary mixed in. Um, what else? Yeah, I go back and forth. I do read mostly memoir, but I do love a great novel too. And I love essays that kind of blend cultural commentary with narrative writing too.
And how about you've got teenage-ish children now, but when they were little, did you have favorite books to read with your kiddos when they were growing up? I know random, but
No, it's good. I mean, I don't think I read out loud, like I read the Harry Potter series out loud to my kids. There were things that I feel like you do because it's kind of a parenting rite of passage, but I feel like this is a controversial thing to say, but it probably shouldn't be. Like I didn't love reading children's books with my
Mhm.
kids. Like
Mhm.
I started really enjoying when they got to sort of, fourth, fifth grade and got into some of those middle grade novels that I think that I remember really well, like Holes or Hatchet or
Mhm.
Boxcar Children. So I would start reading some of those side by side with them, and I just loved it. We read, the Little House on the Prairie series. There's just a lot of great classics and new classics too that I've really enjoyed reading with my kids.
Thank you. You've mentioned your Substack, so that's out there, but website where people can find you if they want to know more about you and the book, website, and then any social media that you're active on.
Yeah, they are both the same actually. GinaDWagner.com is my website. And then almost all of my social media handles are also Gina D. Wagner. I'm really active on Instagram. That's probably where people can find me the easiest.
Okay. We've talked about a few different things, but is there anything, Gina, that we haven't covered that you wanted to make sure you highlighted during this time?
If you are in the US, I've got some events coming up. I'd love to meet people in person. That's been one of the most satisfying things to me the past few weeks, is kind of getting out there. Writing is such a solitary act that when you get to kind of be in front of readers, that's really wonderful. I've got some things coming up in Denver this summer. And then in August, I'll be in Phoenix, Arizona with Nora McInerney, another wonderful author. So I'll be posting about all of those on Instagram and my website if people want to come.
Okay, perfect. Well, I want to say thank you for taking the time out of your weekend to talk to me about the memoir and writing. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you once again to Gina for, like I said, taking time out of her weekend to talk to me about the book. If you are a fan of memoir, definitely check this one out. If you have dealt with grief or dealt with complicated sibling relationships or dealt with complicated family relationships, there's a lot of different entry points into this particular memoir, but it's also it's a journey, as many memoirs are. It's a journey through figuring things out as in the midst of grief, figuring things out in the midst of complicated family relationships, and how those relationships change, sometimes don't change, how they affect our lives, etc. So yeah, if you're a fan of memoir, or you know someone who is a fan of memoir, then you definitely want to check it out. It's written with a lot of heart, a lot of care. There were several passages that I highlighted because I thought, oh my gosh, yes, I feel that. I feel that right here. I've never been able to maybe express it as well as it's written in this paragraph. That's why I'm going to I read a lot on my phone, so sometimes I just screenshot things and then send them to friends and say, look at this paragraph, read this paragraph. I did that a couple of times with this book, so definitely check it out if you are interested. And I hope that you will, of course, join me for the next episode when I will be talking to Leah Lax. We are sticking with nonfiction. This is not a memoir, but this is a series of conversations that Leah had with immigrants to this country. She was working on an opera, and this is a series of conversations that she had with people who came to America from all kinds of different countries, different stories, different walks of life, etc. And this book was born out of that, which also created an opera. So I am looking forward to speaking with Leah. I hope that you will join me for that. In the meantime, thank you, as always, for your support of this podcast. Thank you for joining me for this conversation. I hope your week is going really, really well. If you are, as always, a fan of this podcast and want to support it in lots of different ways, just watching this episode, that's supportive enough. That's great. That helps. You can also like, follow, subscribe, on whatever platform you are either listening to or watching this episode on. Leaving a review, a positive review, is great. That helps the algorithm so much. Doesn't have to be complicated. You can make it short and sweet. A starred or written review, very, very helpful. And as always, you can follow the podcast on social media: Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok. As always, I love hearing from people who have heard the episodes or watched the interviews, etc. Tell me if you've read any of the books by the authors that I've spoken to. Tell me if you found new authors from these interviews. Love hearing from you. So come find the podcast on social media and tell me what you've been reading. In the meantime, again, I hope your week is going well. Whatever you are up to this week, though, as always, my wish for you is that the week gives you plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you so much.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to